I think my mother did exactly the right thing. I think it's absolutely extraordinary.
Queen Camilla expected another routine review of royal holdings. Instead, one sealed vault ledger changed the temperature inside the palace. The entry was old, private, and brutally specific. Money set aside by Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother had been designated for Princess Anne, protected from ordinary royal accounts and preserved for years. Camilla said nothing at first, but when the archivist turned the final page toward her, everyone in the room understood that this was no ordinary inheritance discovery. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Camilla leaned closer as the archivist began reading from the authenticated financial instrument, a legally binding record showing how privately owned money was meant to be controlled and eventually transferred. This was not funding drawn from normal royal expenditure, the money used for official duties and institutional costs. It was personal, deliberate. The Queen Mother had created a protected fund, specifically for Anne, separating it from wider household arrangements so that later changes inside the monarchy could not quietly redirect it. That distinction mattered, because private wealth carried something public money never could: a direct statement of personal trust. The archivist continued, and Camilla's expression tightened. Anne's name did not appear once as some forgotten technical reference. It appeared again and again, tied to instructions that had been renewed rather than abandoned. Someone had gone back to this arrangement and deliberately kept it alive. The Queen Consort had entered the review expecting numbers, inventories, perhaps an old account requiring clarification. Instead, she was staring at proof that an earlier generation of the family had made a conscious decision about who deserved protection. And suddenly, the money felt less important than the judgment behind it. Anne received the call separately, and her reaction carried none of the triumph others might have expected. Princess Anne listened without interrupting, then asked one question: why had the arrangement remained sealed for so long? She wanted to know who had known, who had preserved it, and why nobody had spoken to her. The princess had spent decades building a reputation around duty, endurance, and refusing unnecessary attention. Discovering that her grandmother had quietly placed something aside for her did not feel like winning. It felt like being handed an unfinished conversation from the past. Then came the second record. Camilla watched as the archivist opened another sealed entry, confirming that the fund had survived multiple reviews and had never been intended as a temporary gesture. Attached to it was a handwritten memorandum, a private note preserved with the financial papers. The wording changed everything. The inheritance was described not merely as money, but as recognition of Anne's discretion, service, and willingness to carry responsibility without demanding reward. Anne heard those words later and fell silent. Camilla heard them and understood immediately why they were dangerous. This was no longer simply proof that the Queen Mother had left private funds to her granddaughter. It suggested she had made a judgment about character, and Camilla could accept that Anne had inherited money. Accepting why she had been chosen would prove far more difficult. For Anne, the discovery did not feel like victory. It felt like hearing a voice from the past speak directly into a family already carrying too many old wounds. For Camilla, however, the document raised a harsher question. Why had the Queen Mother gone to such lengths to protect Anne financially and symbolically? The answer drew both women into a story shaped long before today's palace hierarchy, and it forced them to confront what loyalty had once meant inside the royal family. Princess Anne sat alone with the authenticated record in front of her and read the same paragraph twice. An authenticated record meant a document whose origin and validity had been formally confirmed, removing any easy argument that the discovery was simply an archival mistake. She had spent much of her adult life building a reputation around work, discipline, and emotional restraint. That was exactly why this inheritance cut so deeply. Anne had never built her identity around being rewarded, and now a grandmother long gone had left behind something intensely personal that seemed to say she had noticed every sacrifice. Camilla felt the meaning differently. Queen Camilla now stood at the center of the monarchy beside Charles, yet these papers belonged to an older royal world, formed before her present position existed and before many family wounds had healed. The money itself did not trouble her nearly as much as the implication behind it. If the Queen Mother had deliberately protected Anne's share for decades, then perhaps she had seen the princess as uniquely dependable. That thought touched something more painful than wealth. It touched belonging, approval, and the uncomfortable memory of who had once been trusted inside the family, and who had not. Anne finally set the page down and admitted in a private, documented conversation with a senior advisor that the discovery felt more painful than rewarding. She wanted to understand why nobody had told her. Camilla, meanwhile, asked a palace advisor whether the fund could ever have been absorbed into wider family arrangements. The answer was immediate. Unusual restrictions had been written into it specifically to prevent marriages, titles, changes of household, or future internal decisions from altering the beneficiary. The Queen Mother had not simply named Anne once. She had protected the choice against time itself. Then another page changed the atmosphere again. Anne was described in language tied to reliability, continuity, and service without expectation. Camilla understood what those words suggested. This was beginning to look less like an inheritance and more like a judgment about the qualities the crown would someday need most. Anne absorbed the wording quietly, but one detail suddenly stopped her. A date appeared beside the correspondence. Anne recognized it instantly. Years earlier, on that exact date, a private family disagreement had erupted behind closed doors. She had almost forgotten it. The Queen Mother clearly had not. And Anne remembered why. Because that was the night a quiet argument became something far more permanent. The decision had not appeared from nowhere. Years before the vault was opened, one private gathering had altered the Queen Mother's thinking about the future of the family. No cameras recorded it. No formal announcement followed. Yet according to the sealed account attached to the fund, the conversation left a deep impression. Anne had spoken when others stayed cautious, and what she said that night convinced her grandmother that loyalty to the monarchy sometimes required protecting it from its own comfort. Anne remembered the Windsor supper the moment she saw the date. It had followed a tense family discussion over future royal responsibilities, the duties expected of senior members of the monarchy as generations changed. Charles had been there, listening carefully as questions of workload, privilege, and public pressure moved around the table. The Queen Mother had remained measured, but she had understood the danger beneath the argument. If family resentment began shaping royal duty, then private conflict could eventually weaken public confidence. Anne knew that too, and that was why she finally spoke. Anne did not soften her words. Princess Anne told her grandmother that she would accept fewer privileges, fewer comforts, even fewer public rewards, if that was what it took to stop family disputes from damaging the crown. Charles remembered the room falling quiet. The prince understood that she was not offering some polished declaration of loyalty. She was exhausted, angry, frustrated that personal expectations were beginning to compete with responsibility. Anne had never thought of the moment as heroic. She had simply reached the point where silence felt more dangerous than confrontation. The Queen Mother responded with almost nothing that evening, but the sealed memorandum later revealed what happened next. A documented account showed that shortly after the supper, she requested a private meeting with her financial secretary. A financial secretary was the advisor responsible for helping manage personal financial arrangements and instructions. During that meeting, she ordered the creation of a protected reserve for Anne and insisted that its existence remain hidden from the princess while she was alive. The secrecy mattered because she did not want knowledge of the money to influence Anne's behavior or make duty feel rewarded in advance. Camilla read that account carefully and understood why the discovery had become so uncomfortable. Queen Camilla could no longer dismiss the fund as ordinary family planning. Anne had asked for nothing. The older royal had created it because she interpreted one angry, honest conversation as proof of character. That changed everything. The inheritance was not simply about affection. It had been built around a judgment of who could be trusted when royal comfort collided with royal responsibility. Then the final line of the memorandum tightened the story once more. Anne saw the name and went still. Camilla read it seconds later. Charles had known. The inheritance had been secret from Anne, but it had not been secret from everyone, and the king was about to be forced into the center of it. Camilla did not wait for another briefing. She wanted an answer from Charles himself. Behind closed doors, with aides excluded and the vault summary placed between them, she asked the question that had been building from the moment Anne's name appeared in the ledger. How long had he known? Charles hesitated. That hesitation mattered, because before he offered an explanation, Camilla understood that the inheritance had crossed from historical curiosity into something painfully personal, and somebody had deliberately chosen silence. Charles looked at the copied memorandum and knew there was no easy way through it. King Charles finally admitted that he had learned years earlier that the Queen Mother had created a private financial arrangement for Anne. A confidentiality instruction, meaning a formal direction that information must remain restricted until specific conditions are met, had prevented him from disclosing the details. He had known the fund existed, but he had never been given control over it. Camilla heard the explanation, but it did not calm her. As his wife, she was hearing about an old family decision that he had carried alone. As queen, she was realizing that parts of the monarchy's private history had remained completely outside her reach. Camilla pushed the memorandum across the table. Queen Camilla asked why he had never told her, even privately. Charles removed his glasses, set them down, and answered that the decision had never been his to disclose. The words were careful, too careful. She asked the question underneath the question. Had the secrecy reflected distrust of her? Charles immediately insisted that the arrangement belonged to another era, created before her present royal position and before the family structure had changed. But the monarch could see that his answer had missed the wound. Charles then explained something even Anne had not known. The Queen Mother had ordered that the beneficiary remain uninformed until certain archival conditions were satisfied. Conditions tied to the formal opening and verification of the sealed records. Princess Anne had not been excluded because anyone doubted her. She had been kept in the dark, precisely so the money could never shape her behavior. Camilla understood the logic, yet another line in the document made her stop. Service without expectation. Camilla read the phrase again. It felt less like financial language and more like a comparison between different kinds of loyalty. Charles saw the reaction immediately and told her not to turn an old instruction into a judgment on the present. But she could not simply ignore what the words suggested. Anne had been protected because someone believed she would serve without asking what she would receive in return. Then Charles revealed the final complication. He had known of the fund, yes, but he had never possessed the authority to release it. That power belonged to a named trustee, still bound by the Queen Mother's original terms. Charles had kept the secret, but he had never controlled it, and the person who did now held the power to decide whether Anne could finally receive what had been left for her. The most powerful person in the room was not wearing a crown. The decision now rested with the senior trustee, named in the Queen Mother's sealed instructions, someone whose duty was not to protect feelings, but to carry out the original terms exactly as written. Anne waited in silence. Charles remained guarded. Camilla watched every word, and then the trustee opened the final certification file and explained why nobody, not even the monarch, could simply rewrite the Queen Mother's choice. The trustee spoke carefully, because the structure mattered. A trustee arrangement is a legal system in which designated people control money or property according to instructions created by the person who established it. That meant Charles could not simply intervene because he was king. Camilla could not challenge the terms because she was queen. And Anne could not alter the original purpose simply because she had now become the beneficiary. The fund existed under its own instructions, protected from changing relationships, changing titles, and changing palace priorities. That was why the discovery mattered so much. It was personal money, but it had been locked behind rules stronger than family preference. Anne finally broke the silence. Princess Anne looked toward the trustee and asked whether accepting the inheritance would create difficulty for Charles. The question caught Camilla immediately. Anne was not asking how much she would receive. She was asking what the money might do to her brother. The king answered before the trustee could. He told her that refusing something deliberately left to her would not erase the reasons it had been created. Charles knew the decision carried emotional weight, but he also knew rejecting it would not remove the judgment behind it. Anne lowered her eyes for a moment and held her composure. Camilla watched her carefully. The queen consort had spent days struggling with the implication that the queen mother had chosen one woman as a symbol of dependable service. Now she saw something harder to dismiss. Anne was worried about peace inside the family before she was worried about ownership. That reaction only strengthened the meaning of the old documents. The trustee then delivered the final decision. Every release condition had been satisfied. The sealed records had been verified, the required period had passed, and the beneficiary had been formally confirmed. Anne was legally and personally entitled to take control of the protected private fund. Then came one final clause. No spouse, monarch, household office, or later family arrangement could redirect the inheritance. The Queen Mother's instruction had closed every route that might allow future pressure to change her choice. Camilla understood immediately. The formal fight was over, before it had truly begun. But the emotional one was not. The money could finally move, and the moment it did, the relationships surrounding it began shifting too. No one celebrated when the decision became final. Anne had technically won nothing, because she had never fought for anything. Camilla had technically lost nothing, because the money had never belonged to her. Yet both women walked away altered. One carried an unexpected gift from a grandmother long gone. The other carried the sting of realizing that an old royal judgment had survived untouched for decades. And within hours, the emotional distance inside the family became impossible to ignore. Anne received formal confirmation that the fund would now transfer under the Queen Mother's original instructions. But Princess Anne immediately asked advisors to delay any ceremonial acknowledgement. A ceremonial acknowledgement would simply mean an official public or palace recognition of the inheritance, and she wanted none of it. She did not want photographs, speeches, or anything that could make the moment look like triumph. The money mattered because of what it represented, not because it increased her standing. That distinction mattered even more now, because every visible sign of celebration risked turning a private family gift into a rivalry. Camilla understood that danger too. Queen Camilla withdrew from the immediate discussion rather than challenge a result that was already fixed. Alone after the meeting, she removed her reading glasses, folded the vault summary closed, and told an aide she needed several minutes before joining Charles again. The Queen Consort knew that any protest now would be interpreted as resentment toward Anne. But silence came with its own cost. The longer she sat with the documents, the more the old language of trust and service seemed to echo against her own place in the family. Anne called Charles privately before the day ended. She admitted in a recorded family conversation that she felt guilty. Something intended as affection from their grandmother had created strain inside his marriage. King Charles answered without hesitation. He told his sister that the strain had come from secrecy, not from her, and that refusing the inheritance would not undo decades of hidden decisions. Charles wanted her to understand one thing clearly: she had not caused this. Then another instruction surfaced during the transfer. Part of the fund's future income had been intended for causes Anne considered worthy. The wording was simple, but its meaning landed hard. Her grandmother had not merely trusted her to receive money, she had trusted her to decide what good that money should do. Anne made her choice quietly. She would not treat the inheritance as personal luxury. Instead, she began considering how its income could support long-standing charitable work, built around service, responsibility, and practical help. Camilla heard about that decision soon afterward, and something in her response changed. She asked to see Anne alone. No advisors, no Charles, no documents between them. The vault had settled the ownership question, but only Anne and Camilla could settle what the discovery had done between them. There were no lawyers in the room this time, no archivists, no trustees, no king standing between them. Anne and Camilla finally faced each other alone, carrying completely different burdens from the same discovery. Camilla had spent days wondering whether the Queen Mother's decision amounted to a judgment against her. Anne had spent those same days wishing the inheritance had never become a source of pain. What followed was not a royal confrontation. It was two women speaking plainly about a family haunted by memory. Anne spoke first. Princess Anne told Camilla directly that she had never known the fund existed and had never asked the Queen Mother for special treatment. There had been no secret bargain, no private appeal, no quiet attempt to secure money behind anyone's back. She explained that preferential treatment simply meant being given an advantage others did not receive, and that was exactly what made the discovery uncomfortable for her. Anne had built her life around work, not reward. Now she was being forced to accept something that looked, from the outside, like both. Camilla listened without interrupting. Queen Camilla finally admitted that the money itself had never been the deepest wound. What unsettled her was being dragged back into an older royal world, one formed during years when senior members of the family viewed her very differently. She had spent years building a place beside Charles, yet one document had reminded her how completely another generation's judgments could survive. Anne understood then that this was not jealousy, it was memory. Camilla asked the question she had avoided from the beginning. Did Anne believe the Queen Mother would have accepted the woman she eventually became? The princess paused. She did not offer easy comfort. Instead, she said that nobody could rewrite the past, but people could decide what they did with the present. The answer landed harder because it was honest. Camilla did not need Anne to pretend old wounds had never existed. She needed permission to stop living inside them. Anne then admitted something of her own. The inheritance embarrassed her. Every pound seemed to place a spotlight on a kind of recognition she had never chased. Camilla answered quietly that perhaps this was exactly why her grandmother had trusted her with it. Anne did not argue. Then came the choice that changed the meaning of everything. Through a documented private conversation, Anne confirmed that much of the fund's future benefit would support service-oriented causes rather than personal luxury. The inheritance would become responsibility. Camilla finally separated the old decision from the woman standing before her. The Queen Mother's choice belonged to another era. Their relationship did not have to. Once Anne and Camilla stopped treating the inheritance as a verdict on each other, the family was finally ready for the verdict of everyone outside the palace walls. The story could no longer remain contained within palace walls. Once confirmation of Anne's inheritance entered the public conversation, the meaning of the Queen Mother's secret decision changed again. It was no longer simply a matter between relatives. Commentators began asking what the choice revealed about duty, trust, and the quieter members of the royal family. Yet one image captured the mood better than any debate. Anne returning to work while headlines about her unexpected fortune filled Britain. Anne refused to disappear behind palace gates. Princess Anne kept a previously scheduled engagement, even as newspapers, broadcasters, and commentators turned the inheritance into a national talking point. A royal engagement is an official public duty carried out on behalf of the monarchy, and keeping that commitment mattered because it sent a simple message: the money had not changed her priorities. The public discussion quickly moved beyond the amount itself. People wanted to know why the Queen Mother had chosen her so deliberately, why the fund had been protected for so long, and what those decisions said about the kind of service an older royal generation valued most. The headlines grew louder. One major London newspaper carried the front-page words, "The Queen Mother's last vote of trust," framing the inheritance as something far deeper than private wealth. Outside Windsor, small groups gathered and discussed whether Anne's decades of steady work had finally been recognized in a way no public honor ever could. A broadcaster pushed the same contrast even further, describing the princess as someone who had spent years avoiding glamour while suddenly becoming the center of a story about money, privilege, and royal approval. Anne heard the coverage but refused to respond publicly. Camilla understood that her next appearance mattered just as much. Queen Camilla appeared beside Charles shortly afterward and remained composed, offering no sign that the private tension had become an open family rupture. The king stayed close, aware that even a cold gesture could feed speculation about resentment. Their calm presence changed the tone. Whatever had happened behind closed doors, the monarchy was not going to turn the Queen Mother's decision into a public feud. Anne strengthened that message by saying nothing about personal victory. She returned to duty, avoided questions about the fund, and allowed her actions to speak instead. The silence mattered, because celebration would have contradicted everything the inheritance supposedly represented. She had been trusted for service without expectation, and now the country was watching to see whether sudden wealth would alter that pattern. It did not. But one decision still remained. The headlines had decided what the inheritance symbolized, but only Anne could decide what it would become. In the end, the most important thing inside the royal vault was never the money. It was the intention behind it. The Queen Mother had looked at Anne, seen a woman who rarely asked for recognition, and chosen to leave behind something that could outlive applause, scandal, and changing royal generations. Camilla had been stunned by what the documents revealed. Anne had been humbled by it. But the final meaning of the inheritance would not be decided by an old memorandum. Anne would decide it herself. Anne formally accepted the private fund and ended the last uncertainty surrounding the Queen Mother's decision. Princess Anne understood that acceptance meant more than taking possession of money. A private fund was wealth held outside ordinary royal expenditure and preserved under personal instructions, making this gift deeply tied to family intention rather than public office. She could have rejected it out of discomfort. Instead, she chose to honor what her grandmother had deliberately arranged. That mattered, because refusing it would not erase the trust behind it. It would only leave that trust unanswered. Anne then made the decision that gave the inheritance its final meaning. She directed that a substantial share of its future benefit support charitable and service-based work, rather than private luxury. The princess had spent decades proving that responsibility mattered more to her than applause, and now she had the chance to turn inherited privilege into practical purpose. In a documented private meeting, she signed the acceptance papers, placed the pen down, and told Charles simply that she intended the money to do some good. There would be no elaborate celebration, no special palace announcement, no victory. Charles heard those words, and finally felt the burden shift. King Charles had carried knowledge of the arrangement for years, bound by instructions he could not break. For him, the secret had often felt like another weight from a complicated family past. Now he saw something different. Anne was not being rewarded for demanding more. She was being trusted, because she had repeatedly demanded less from the institution than she demanded from herself. Camilla completed the emotional circle quietly. Queen Camilla congratulated Anne in private, with no bitterness and no argument left between them. She had begun this story stunned by what the vault seemed to say about old royal loyalties. She ended it understanding that the Queen Mother's choice did not have to become a judgment on her present place in the family. The old decision belonged to another era. The relationship between the two women belonged to them. And that was the final verdict. Anne's standing grew not because she inherited wealth, but because of what she chose to do with it. Discipline, loyalty, independence, service without expectation. Those were the qualities the original instructions had rewarded, and her response proved them again. The Queen Mother's choice belonged to the past. Anne gave it meaning in the present. Camilla's shock became acceptance. Charles's burden became relief, and a secret that once threatened to divide the family became a final act of trust, linking one royal generation to the next. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.